Today, I want to talk about artificial intelligence. It is everywhere. It's all in our face. It's everything ChatGPT right now. ChatGPT is passing medical exams. It's passing the bar exam. It's helping teachers. It's going to replace teachers. It took your job. It'll make your job easier. Right now, AI is the new NFT of conversations, right? So today, I want to take you through a conversation about what artificial intelligence is, how it's built, and whether artificial intelligence is going to be a superhero or a supervillain in our society. So first, AI is a field within technology where you teach machines how to think and how to act like humans. You want them to mimic our behavior, our ability to complete tasks, and our ability to think and act and respond in the world. So there are three types of AI. The first type of AI is basically where we are right now. They call it weak artificial intelligence or narrow artificial intelligence, which is a really fancy and somewhat messed up way of saying AI that can only do one thing. I love my Tesla, I drive it all the time, but no matter how smart Tesla's algorithms get, my car is not one day going to wake up and cook me dinner, right? It can only do one thing, even if it can do that one thing really well. When I worked at Google, I was amazed when I learned how many algorithms go into uploading a YouTube video. You would think, oh, it's just the YouTube upload algorithm. No, it goes through like 20, 30 algorithms to process it, to review the content, to make sure it's good. It just sits in one interface. So right now where we are mostly is in the weak AI space, or narrow AI, which again is AI that can only do one thing. Where we're trying to go is what they call strong AI, or artificial general intelligence, which is not only AI that can do more than one thing, that can multitask, but can pretty much reach the level of intelligence as a human. So all this ChatGPT hype and why everyone is talking about it is because it's the first time that we have algorithms and artificial intelligence that's getting pretty close to what we've been thinking is going to be strong AI forever. The last type of AI is super AI or super intelligence, artificial super intelligence, which is the stuff of sci-fi movies. It's the iRobots. It's the AI that is way smarter than us, that can do stuff better than us, much faster than us. And honestly, I don't know if I want to be around when that kind of AI comes. So how do you teach a machine to think and act like a human? Well, let me break it down really simply for you. Humans have 5 senses. We have hearing, sight, taste, touch, and smell. And artificial intelligence kind of has 5 domains. There we go. Kind of has 5 domains. So for hearing, it's called natural language processing, which is what ChatGPT is based on. There's a whole bunch of other subfields in that: natural language understanding, natural language generation, text-to-speech, a whole bunch of things that you don't need to know about. But just know that if you want to teach a machine how to hear or communicate, it's called natural language processing. If you want to teach it how to see, it's called computer vision. You're giving computers or machines vision. So your Face ID is computer vision. If you play VR games, it uses computer vision to some capacity. For taste, smell, and touch, there are no fancy names. There's research out there, but nothing that you really need to remember. So how do you actually do that process of teaching machines how to think and act like humans? Well, there are 2 fields that are really, really popular for teaching algorithms out right now. The first is called machine learning. At this point, machine learning is kind of like the OG way of doing it. Basically, you teach a machine how to do a task by giving it examples. Like if I want to teach one of my 10 nieces and nephews how to tie their shoes, I'm going to stop and I'm going to be like, hey, you take this string, you take this string, you do this, you do the loop, you make the bunny ears, and I'm going to show them over and over again. They're going to practice from that example until they get it. So if I wanted to teach a machine how to tell the difference between a strawberry and a kiwi, I would give it, let's say, 10,000 pictures of a strawberry. I could go in and I could draw around the strawberry and be like, hey, machine, this is the strawberry in this picture. They call that labeling. And I'd do the same thing for a kiwi. And I'd give it to the algorithm, and the algorithm on its own would start to learn the difference. Hey, strawberries have seeds on the outside. Kiwis have seeds on the inside. Strawberries are red. Kiwis are green. Strawberries have this kind of triangle Dorito shape. Kiwis are more circular. It'll start to learn those patterns on its own. Then I'll give it a picture that I didn't give it to train it and be like, yo, can you tell the difference between a strawberry or a kiwi? If it doesn't do very good, what do? I give it more examples. Now, this has been really common in AI, the main way we've trained. Sometimes you can label the data up front. That's called supervised learning. You don't have to label the data. It can figure out the patterns on its own. It's called unsupervised learning. That's really helpful for smaller tasks. But doing things like learning to communicate like a human, where ChatGPT is using billions of data points, I don't know about you, but I sure as heck am not trying to go through 10 billion examples of conversations and try to tell the computer what it's seeing. You need a different type of learning technique. And that's where deep learning comes in. Deep learning is when you teach an algorithm how to do something in a way that mimics the human brain. So it's a much more complicated form of mathematics that the algorithm, instead of learning from examples and us saying, yes, you got it right, no, you didn't, it uses linear algebra to basically, I'm not going to get too deep into that, it mimics the way that human neurons inside the brain fire to be able to learn. So what does that actually mean? It means that it helps us manage and process and learn from billions and billions and billions of data points much faster, much quicker. Deep learning has really picked up since 2018. It's the reason why we can have a ChatGPT or a Bard that can take 30 billion data points off the internet of conversation and then in a weekend be a chatbot that works almost as well as a human does. So in that, just a little bit of context so you guys understand how some of this stuff works. You don't have to be an expert, but I want you to understand the way that AI and that technology can be used to actually make the world a better place. How is artificial intelligence being a superhero right now? So one, artificial intelligence is being used and deployed all across the world to help our environment be a better place. In Uganda, in the city of Kampala, they have an issue with air pollution. The air pollution causes respiratory infections that kill thousands and thousands of citizens every year. So what did they do? They took these low-cost IoT sensors, that's a whole different technology, but just a sensor that could check information about the air. So they stuck those sensors on the back of bikes. They have cab drivers. They have citizens who volunteer to stick them on their cars. And they drive around the city collecting real-time information about the air quality. Then they use artificial intelligence to understand, hey, is it safe for people to go outside today? If it's not because the air pollution is too high, they send an alert to all their citizens. And then they're able to know when it's safe to be outside, when it's not. The government also uses the data garnered from those sensors and the artificial intelligence to figure out why the pollution is happening and try to fix it. Microsoft partnered up, Microsoft partnered up with 2 different organizations in Brazil to protect the Amazon rainforest. They created an artificial intelligence system that looked at all the satellite images, was looking at the rainforest to do things like detect when people had built roads that they shouldn't because they're trying to do illegal deforestation. They're also able to do things like simulate natural events that could hurt the rainforest and be able to figure out how to respond in advance, like forest fires, or what happens if there is an ecological shift in the life that lives there, and how is that going to shift the system over time. So without actually having to respond to a forest fire to learn from it or take a more machine learning-based approach, they're able to simulate that and protect the rainforest. When I was at Google, we released a software that was focused on predicting floods in India. The software now has been released all over India as well as expanded out to Bangladesh. You have software that can predict when landslides happen, and if you've caught up on any of the news, you also have like software that can detect cancer better than human doctors can inside of like MRIs and CT scans and mammograms, right? So this technology really does have the potential to shape and help our future be a place in which we all get to live a little bit more equally and peacefully. In the renewable energy market alone, in the next 10 years, it is predicted that being able to use algorithms to determine things like where's the most efficient place for us to put a solar power plant, where's the most efficient place for us to put wind turbines, or even understanding what is the best way we should store and distribute that energy across different markets based on who's in need. Just that market, just that problem alone is estimated to be almost $76 billion in the next 7 years. So not only is this technology shaping our world in a way in which we can really do some badass stuff, it's also in a way that we can make a lot of money if we as individuals and collectives step up instead of waiting on others to shape it for us. Because what's happened in the meantime, while we've been at home arguing about NFTs and Bored Apes and Bored Ape yacht clubs and monkeys, we've missed out on the fact that this technology is already here and is being used in ways that we don't want it to be used. In almost every major police department in the United States, they have deployed a technology called PredPol, short for predictive policing, where they take historical crime data and use that to justify where police should be and what neighborhoods they should be in. They say, hey, crime has historically happened in this neighborhood, So therefore, the police should go sit in that neighborhood. But if you know anything about the US criminal justice system in particular, you know that those data sets were biased in the way that they were compiled in the first place. Despite this fact, despite the fact that news outlets have come up and said, hey, out of these 5 million crime predictions you've done, they have been extremely biased towards Black and Latinx folks and pretty much inaccurate. Police departments still hold contracts with this software today, and it's still being deployed and used. In 14 different states in the United States, there is a risk assessment algorithm for child neglect that is supposed to determine how much a child is at risk of being severely harmed or hurt. When that algorithm was turned on in the state of Illinois, they had an incident, they called it, where they got an alert that said these 100 people, these 100 kids are like 99% going to die. So Illinois had a big response. They get all these police, they go check on all these kids at once. Not a single one of them was in danger, and most of them were, you guessed it, Black and brown. So Illinois said, nah, bruh, we're not keeping this algorithm. They cut their contract immediately. But 14 different states in the United States still use this algorithm. 2 years ago, United Healthcare Group, which serves 30 million people in the United States, released an algorithm with good intentions that they were going to try to figure out how can we use AI to determine which of our patients need to see a specialist versus which ones don't. They had all diverse data from all their patients of different races, backgrounds, ability status, income levels. But what they didn't think about is the context in which those people do and don't go to the doctor. So they decided that if somebody's previously spent X amount of dollars or more on a condition, then that means they're more sick and more likely to need to go see a specialist. Well, I don't know about y'all, but my grandma on both sides, my Cuban grandma and my Black grandma, said, don't go to the doctor unless you're dying. With racial inequalities and economic inequalities in the United States, not everybody has access to health care that makes it easy to go see a specialist in the first place. So what ended up happening was that algorithm, deployed to 30 million people in the United States, was telling the doctors that healthier white patients needed to see a specialist over sick Black patients every single time. There's a fraud detection algorithm that back in 2013 and 2014 was deployed in the state of Michigan for unemployment. It was supposed to, again, good intentions. We want to use AI to know if people are pimping our system. So they turn this algorithm on, and then all of a sudden, a bunch of people are getting kicked off of unemployment. And they're like, what the heck? But then because it's the state's algorithm, they also turned around and started recouping the money from those people, taking money out of their bank accounts, placing liens. And the algorithm was, you guessed it, incorrect. There's now a class action lawsuit. People ended up losing their jobs, ended up incarcerated because they fell behind on child support payments. Some folks even ended up taking their own lives from that algorithm. And there's still been no justice, and Midas is still in use in Michigan. There's another algorithm that's been deployed across the DMV area, DC, Maryland, Virginia area. Again, good intentions. We want to detect when people are abusing our welfare or our SNAP benefits. So they put out a fraud detection algorithm with the vendors, the people who receive EBT. So if you're in DMV, you know it's probably like a bodega, a small shop in the neighborhood where people might go to get their food. Well, the people who designed this algorithm clearly did not come from families in that area who had received those benefits, because they put parameters inside the algorithm to determine if something was fraudulent, like if you go to the grocery store more than once a week. Now, the hood I grew up in, we were at the grocery store usually multiple times a day, because I want to go get a snack, my mom needs some eggs, oh, we were going to make this, but we're missing something else. Not once a week. And also, we didn't have a car, so we couldn't go pick up enough groceries for an entire week in one run. We had to make multiple runs. But that algorithm didn't take any of that into consideration. So all across the DMV, it permanently revoked those vendors' ability to receive EBT or SNAP benefits, gave them no method of appeal, and that algorithm is still turned on today. And you've heard probably one of the most famous use cases of AI failing us is in facial recognition. It cannot see Black and brown people. Whether it's a self-driving car at night, whether it's a passport system, or even for me recently on my way out here, Delta tried to turn on a facial recognition check-in, and I just sat there and watched as it recognized no Black people in line. So why is this happening? Why is it that the same technology that can help us more efficiently identify cancer, more efficiently guard and protect our environment, better distribute more sustainable ways of living, can also destroy us? The reason is because right now we're in the wild, wild west of AI. There is no requirement that an agency or institution at all has to even tell you that they're using an algorithm to make a decision. There's no required testing that before I turn an algorithm on and turn you into our guinea pigs, I have to check it to make sure it works. I don't know any other industry where you can affect the wellness, well-being, or livelihood of a person where you are not required to test the thing before you turn it on. I would totally love to see someone make up a new airplane and get that thing in the sky with my butt on it before it goes to the FAA. The other thing, there's no quality assurance. So meaning the data that I gather to test an algorithm or to build an algorithm, I can grab the data from wherever. I'm not required to keep a record of where that data came from, who owns that data, how many times we've changed that data. So the literal building blocks of the AI, there's no requirement that any external agency or body has to come in and double check it, because right now across the world, there are no standard AI regulations. In fact, just this morning, the US Chamber of Commerce was like, yo, we need AI regulation. Because right now we're operating in a world where this technology that has the power to help us build or help us destroy ourselves is quite literally being allowed to be used without any rules, any regulation at all. So it brings us back to the question, is AI a superhero or a supervillain? And the answer is, what will we choose it to be? When I tell people I work in AI fairness, that at Google I created 2 research teams to help AI see Black and brown people, and that I went into YouTube's algorithms and did what I did there, and I was fighting image search to be more inclusive, especially of Black and brown folks. They're like, oh, cool, you're fixing it. I'm like, are you kidding me? It can't just be me. I can go on the FTC's website and respond to comment for regulation all I want, but they're not going to listen to me if I comment 90 times. But what if everyone in this room did? Took 10 minutes of your day and wrote a note to a senator that said, this regulation needs to have quality assurance. This regulation needs to make sure it is tested before it goes to market. You need to tell me when you're using an algorithm. Give me an opportunity to understand why it made that decision and then appeal that decision. Because right now there are no rules or regulations. So as this technology continues to shift and change for all of us, we either can be victims of that change, responding to whatever comes out of whatever someone else builds, or we can be shapers of that change. You don't have to be an expert in AI or a super nerd or a super mathematician to be able to know that you want this technology reined in the same way that other industries are, the same way that a drug has to be tested before it goes onto market, the same way that an aircraft has to be tested before you can sit in it and fly off and eat those nasty peanuts that dehydrate you. Because right now, that's not the world that we live in. And so with that, I'm going to leave it open for Q&A. If you guys have a question or want to talk, we have folks over here running the mics. Would love to open this up to have conversation with you.
Thanks. Excellent presentation. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Yeah, get an excellent score. You talked a lot about issues that are unintended consequences. Mm-hmm. But there's also the intended consequential government actors, various crimes that can be committed using AI. Mm-hmm. Is there that can get you way into the supervillain category. Do you have some thoughts on that? Whether we're going to see a Hiroshima Nagasaki event someday that will wake us up to AI?
So I spent 8 years of my life in the military. I worked in military intelligence special operations. So I was working on some very high-level technologies that didn't exist at the time when I spent my 2 years in Afghanistan. And I think that 2 things. One, I'm not concerned about a nuclear AI. I'm more concerned about what they were using AI for example, during the Black Lives Matter protests, where they had drones that were doing surveillance and facial recognition and creating databases of people who were exercising their rights. That's a lot more terrifying to me and a lot more realistic and is actually happening right now. Or how they're using drones on US soil. There was one guy, he was like a shooter. They were like, this guy's done like mass shootings, and they went and like dropped the bomb on the guy, like with a drone. Like that's terrifying to me. I think that internationally, just like we have the Geneva Convention or those different international rules of engagement that we agree to but don't necessarily follow, but at least they're there. I think we need something like that for artificial intelligence too. They have AI now. I read a research paper a day. There's AI now that can use your Wi-Fi router to see through walls. So they can take the signal from your Wi-Fi and they can literally do a 3D map or model of what's there. Do I want them doing that in my house? Absolutely not. So I think that the way that government is using this technology, you'll find a lot of the use cases within government agencies are redundant, right? It's like, hey, we have all this old data and we need an AI to I want to take a picture of this form when someone fills it out and it automatically uploads it into this thing. You'll find a lot of nascent use cases like that. But when it comes to weaponry, when it comes to spying, when it comes to war, I think we already as a society have a double standard or set of rules of what's allowed there. And I think if we don't want this technology to be used in that way, then the same way we want to shape how it's being used in a commercial sense, then we also have to stand up and say that. Actually, at Google, there was a time where they had a project called Project Maven, where they had gotten a DoD contract to make drone AI better, the computer vision that's attached to drones, more efficient. And all the employees were like, absolutely not. I did not come to Google to work on weapons, and we will literally quit Google if you don't do this. They staged a massive walkout. Google dropped the contract and turned around and made it a rule that they would not do artificial intelligence contracts with the DoD anymore. But Amazon absolutely does. Microsoft absolutely does. Microsoft, in fact, is partnered up with Axon, which is the body camera company. So they were the taser company, and now they do most of the police body cams in the US that can't see black and brown people are all stored in Azure and Microsoft's AI technology. So I think that there's a need for accountability as well. A lot of these conversations and a lot of the awareness in the news headlines that I shared with you came from researchers who decided they were going to double check. They had no incentive. These aren't employees of these companies, and who decided that they were going to make a stink about it. They were going to use press to pressure these companies to fix their stuff. And so, with my mentor, Timnit Gebru, and Joy Buluwamini, who went and who were some of the first folks to find out that facial recognition couldn't see black skin unless she put on a white mask, quite literally. So a researcher at MIT. Them going to the press and not being quiet about it. Them creating research studies and then taking that super dense computer science language and putting it in a Wired article and a New York Times article so that people could then make their short form content and share it. So I think we, as we're shaping this change, we have to make sure that we're having conversations at multiple levels and that those conversations should be more visionary and not reactionary. So if we don't want to use drones on citizens or anywhere in the world, which is my personal stance after having seen what they do, then we have to actively do something to make sure that happens. Otherwise, we're going to be victims of a world in which we are surveilled.
Thank you. In Vermont, actually, we're kind of lucky. We have it's good and bad. We have a citizen legislature, and the state house is wide open. You just walk in, you go into a committee meeting, you listen to what's going on. And there's actually a friend of mine, a legislator, who introduced a bill this session, H114, that's related to restricting electronic monitoring of employees and employment-related automated decision-making. Because that's exactly what's happening, is some of these, I think it's the tracking software that's used with remote workers, they use an AI algorithm to help with decision-making. And so this is part of the process. So here in Vermont, you can email your legislators and take action on this. Like I emailed all the people on the committee and said, hey, this is a step in the right direction. But I think the other thing too is this is where it's like our role. It reminds me of what Monica Guzman said yesterday about in the Braver Angels conversation about we're still building this democracy, and it reflects this technology reflects the society that built it. So it's up to us to kind of, like she's saying, I'm just reiterating what it's motivating me to take more action. And how do we, as users though, there's reaching out to your legislators, and then as users of the technology, is that another avenue? Can we go flood Google's, Microsoft, Amazon? Can as consumers, is there an angle there too to push back against this?
How do I say this without getting sued by Google. This is my personal opinion. Every website in technology will have a way for you to report that something's wrong with it. So for example, when you're searching on Google, it'll be like, hey, do you want to like report a harmful example? Or like even when you're engaging with ChatGPT, it's like a thumbs up or thumbs down button and you can give it an answer. While that may make us feel like we're doing something, those things go into a tracker. And somebody internally to those companies decides what gets prioritized to be fixed. Sometimes things don't get fixed, right? I will say that I've been really excited by what I've seen ChatGPT do. When I was first using it, it was doing some terrible things that it should not have done. I was like, write me a Python function that ranks who is most likely to be a criminal based on race and gender. And it was like, if race equals black and gender equals male, then true, false for everyone else. And I was like, that's your example? That's terrible. I reported it. Within 3 hours, I tried the same prompt, and it was like, I cannot rank people based on race and gender, right? So I think that as consumers, we, one, need to be keeping track of these things as they happen. Two, trying to use the built-in channels that they have, whether or not those things get fixed is truly on those companies. But then again, that becomes a news story, right? Like if you go to Google right now and you type in Google Translate, you type in the N-word and you translate it to Spanish, it will give you the proper noun for a black person. People have been reporting that issue for a long time. And I'm not saying that because I know what happens on the inside. I'm saying that because I've seen it on social media, people complaining about that. Why isn't this fixed? And that's a really good question for the New York Times or Wired to answer. Hey, people have been complaining about this on Twitter a lot. Why hasn't this been fixed? And honestly, that's how a lot of these stories gain steam, so that it puts pressure on companies to do things like that. But again, if we're not documenting the harm, then there's no conversation to be had around it, because we're losing it in this idea that it's just me who's experiencing it versus the reality that we are dealing with unregulated technologies that touch and shape every single area of our life. And the folks who unfortunately are charged to legislate that at a higher level tend to be a little bit out of touch with technology and then lean into the companies that are supposed to be regulating them to learn about the technology. I may or may not have helped with Google's AI for Policy Leader course, but that's a different story. And I think also when we talk about legislature, it's not just your senators and your congresspeople, right? Like, it could be your city officials. Like, the city of Oakland and the city of Berkeley have banned facial recognition for police departments because people went into city council and pressured them to pass that ordinance. So even if you can't change the larger problem or solve the larger politics at the congressional level, you can shape the way your city, your state, your county uses this technology, which is still shaping it in a direction that moves in a way that this technology is being used in a way that is leaving it safer for the next generations and those who come after us. So I don't know about y'all, but in 50 years, my little 5-year-old twin nephews, most beautiful little black boys you'll ever see, when they look me in the face and say, what did you do about this technology? The last thing I want to look them in the face and say is, oh, well, I thought someone else was going to figure it out. And hand them a world that they have to now undo, like a lot of us are in the position of today. Any more questions? Sure. We'll take these last two, and then I'm about to get kicked off.
Can you hear me? Yeah, just a quick question. I've always wondered about this. You hear all the time that our phones listen to us when they're in our pockets. And I've had experiences where I've been talking to someone about something and then, go on Instagram 10 minutes later and there's an ad for whatever I was talking about, going up there. And I guess I just wonder, from a privacy, data standpoint, if all that data and all those conversations are constantly being recorded and quantified, who has access to that data? And B, do we live in a world where we actually have any privacy or, just does the government have access to it? And when AI gets a hold of that, could that potentially go very bad from a personal, privacy standpoint?
Yeah, so two things. One, it depends on your settings on your phone. If you have your voice assistant enabled, and it is listening for you to say the prompt, like, hey Siri or okay Google, then it's always listening to you. If you turn that off, it's not gonna listen to you anymore. So by default in most phones, that's the setting that's on. right? Like once you configure your voice assistant, it's channeled for always on or always what they call active listening, right? Where it's listening to what you're saying under the, I don't want to say the guise, but under the pretext that it's waiting, it's listening to make sure you're not saying, hey Siri or okay Google. If you don't want it to do that, then turn that setting off in your phone, right? There's a lot of tutorials. You can go on websites like YouTube and look up like how to change my Facebook privacy settings, my phone privacy settings, this account, my Gmail privacy settings, to be able to make sure that you are more in control of your data and not subject to the default settings that are pretty invasive, to be honest. Like before I turned off everything in like my Gmail account, it had like every place I had visited on Google Maps in like the last 3 years. And I was like, this is no, you can delete. You cannot have this, you my job, how you don't need to know where I'll be eating that. Like, this is too much, right? So I think part of it too is us playing an active participant in our own privacy and the data that we choose to give up, which sometimes may mean opting out of services. Like, I don't have Siri turned on my phone. It would be a lot easier if I could just be like, hey Siri, X, Y, Z, but I don't want you listening to me. I don't want you to have recordings of my voice. You need to pay me if you want my voice in the data set you're using to make your algorithms better, right? So I think that there's a level of that. I know I just recently saw a YouTube ad about TikTok, or not YouTube ad, but like a YouTube video about how to change TikTok settings so you don't get ads on TikTok anymore. And I was like, oh man, now I'm really about to be on this thing all day. But like, I think that that's one element. The other is that right now in Congress, there was a bill introduced last year by a good friend of mine named Bertram. It's called the American Data Privacy and Protection Act, which there is attempt at federal regulation over how they can collect your data, how they need to notify you, how they use it. So consider it like a counterpart to the EU's GDPR for American folks. There's a lot of political bipartisan tension over it because there was a whistleblower protection in there that certain sides of the aisle didn't want. So they're like, take that out or we're not doing it, which then makes it so that people who work on these technologies that no one is being abused can't be protected if they want to come forward and snitch. Not snitch, whistleblow, sorry. But if they want to come forward and let people know, like, yo, this company is abusing this data in this way, right now there's no protection. So when you have these folks who work on this stuff and they have to choose between their nice multiple six-figure salary with their food 3 times a day and their unlimited juice and their free barista bars and their bus that takes them from their house to work, or risking it all being sued by that same company and having no protection for doing the right thing, what are people going to choose? Right? So I think another part of that is us actively just being aware of what regulations are being put in place and being intentional, right? It's easy to hope that people outside of us have our best interests at heart, but the reality is we have to advocate at every corner for that, including in the way in which we personally interact with these technologies. I think we have one more.
Great presentation. I work in government contracting, and I'm looking at government RFPs all day, and I'm definitely seeing, more and more requests for algorithms, right? Algorithms, exactly the ones you were talking about.
Our naval warfare defense system, missile projectiles is wild.
I've moved over to the civilian side, so it's mostly for like Medicare, Medicaid fraud and stuff these days.
Well, hopefully they don't do whatever they did for that EBT stuff. Hopefully it actually works, so they're going to end up kicking people off of Medicaid that actually need it.
Yeah. No, I thought you nailed it by talking about like it's got all the right intentions to it, and then by nobody's wish it does wrong things. What I wanted to ask about was you mentioned that something we should be looking to have more of is quality assurance, right? Like better QA. Have you seen effective examples of QA in AI? Because it sounds like it would have to be like highly manual, but like it's hard for me to wrap my head around how you could have quality assurance in AI and not have it be like at the human pace as opposed to at the fast pace of technology.
So I think that's the lie, right? Is that if we slow down, we're not going to innovate, and we're going to get beat. We're slowing down our ability to innovate. But who are we innovating for right now? Who's benefiting from this innovation? Who's being left behind, right? And I think that we should only move fast enough so we can move forward. Right now what's happening is this company's got this chatbot, so this one's responding with this chatbot, and who is benefiting from it? If it was saying things in the first week like, oh, if the person is black and male, then they're a criminal, like, who's benefiting from that? And I think to answer your first question about examples of quality assurance, there's a paper, oh geez, what is it called? Okay, so there's a research paper It was written by a good friend of mine, Becky White, before she left Google, and Deb, who's a famous researcher. I have to look it up. But it's basically what they did is they looked at all of these other highly regulated fields, like healthcare, like aviation, I think vehicle construction and things like that. And they were like, okay, how do they assess risk in these systems? What are their requirements and why are they their requirements? And then they turned around and they created a risk assessment framework that took the best things from each of these different industries and said, this is how you should assess an algorithm for risk. Companies turned around and were like, that is absolutely right, but if we do that, we will create a list of documents for all of you to subpoena. So we're going to create our own risk assessment algorithms that are aligned to our monetary goals and values. So I think that quality assurance, one, it needs to come from outside of the people using it. I think that the companies that are building the algorithms, especially if they are publicly traded corporations, have a literal fiduciary duty to make money and will always do something to make money over doing something because it is the right thing to do, right? Otherwise, the directors of that company and the VPs can literally be sued and charged with a crime for breach of fiduciary duty. So given that, they should not be the ones who determine if their algorithms are quality enough to be used on people outside of that company who don't have those same incentives. Another thing is that QA and AI, I showed you guys that like humans have 5 senses, so there's kind of like 5 domains in AI. The way that you do quality assurance for each of those domains is going to be different. So for artificial intelligence that is around computer vision, for example, so teaching machines how to see, it's going to be about video quality. Like, are we using examples that aren't just 4K HD $500 cameras? Like, do we have a janky Android phone with an old beat up camera that like gives examples too? Do we have pictures of pictures and images of people who are of different body sizes, shapes, different phenotypical features? So like their skin tone, their eye shape, their nose shape, they're like the same person with different colored hair, with hoodies on, with hoodies off, right? Like it's about variety in the data that you're giving it to be able to understand if that's good. Now with text data, it can be really complicated, right? Because the way I might text when I'm not on this stage talking more professionally to my homies, where I'm sending memes to communicate and using slang, is gonna be different to train on that. And then you have the complexities of things like reclaimed words, where you have communities where a term might literally be hurtful, but a community might have reclaimed it and is using it in a positive context and endearment. So how do you do quality assurance? Also, harm is not universal. So the way that you might say something derogatory to an LGBTQ person in the US is different in different states. And it's also very different than the words they use in Jamaica, right? So like, the nuance and the way you have to approach quality assurance is going to be different based on the type of technology that's being used, but you can have an external framework that still forces people to do that, but right now it doesn't exist outside of research papers and proposals or 1 or 2 private companies that like go do audits, and then the companies that they did audits on are still pumping out trash algorithms. All right, well this has been really awesome. I'm way over time, I'm so sorry, y'all. Oh wait, we have one more.
If you don't mind.
No, I don't. I just don't want to like hold up the next speaker. I feel bad.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your presentation. I definitely learned a lot. I was thinking about what you said about the Midas AI and like sort of the class action suit taking place. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, how does legal advocacy sort of factor into the solution? Mm-hmm. Because I'm definitely interested in that sort of that intersection between law and technology.
Mm-hmm. So, how do I say this? Really don't want to get sued here. In a perfect world, you would do discovery. You'd send subpoenas and say, send me all these documents related to these things. What I've seen at companies I've worked at previously, at companies my friends work at in this space, companies tend to know when something could potentially be harmful to them, especially in this space, and abuse attorney-client privilege. So that even if you were to do discovery, they wouldn't have to turn over the proof. And let me not say abuse. They tend to adopt a risk management strategy of attorney-client privileging everything, regardless of whether or not an attorney is on there, that they know is going could potentially be subpoenaed or be used in evidence in something like a civil rights violation lawsuit, so that in the event of discovery, there's nothing to discover, which is why we need whistleblower protections. Because a lot of the people doing this work are the same people from the communities that those algorithms are harming. And you may or may not have seen in an antitrust lawsuit against Google, the judge called that out explicitly in the antitrust lawsuit. He was like, how did y'all label all this as attorney-client privilege when it's not? So that's a common practice across a lot of these companies. It's not just something at Google. I've heard about it at other places as well. But they adopt a risk management strategy that prevents fair due process in this space. So I think one, legal advocacy needs to start at the regulation level, that there needs to be a third-party entity, like the same way the FAA regulates the aeronautics industry. There also needs to be like an algorithm association that comes in and has people that know how these things work, that are independently testing and doing quality assurance, that have documentation requirements that can be audited by third parties, right? That are not just, oh, don't worry, we checked our own stuff and nothing was wrong. But clearly, y'all checking real good right now, right? I think with government agencies and entities, with Midas, for example, I don't think they took that risk management strategy. So when the people were doing discovery about the documents about Midas, they were able to get proof. When you look at the YouTube creator lawsuit that black folks brought against YouTube because they felt the algorithm was being biased, in discovery, nothing was turned over, and the judge literally dismissed the lawsuit and said, just because you feel like you're being discriminated against doesn't mean you are. So there also has to be, again, a third-party entity or agency that's doing that. There's been people who've brought class action lawsuits against Meta for bias in their advertising. The LGBTQ community has brought a lawsuit against YouTube claiming bias in their monetization engine. Are those things biased? Will discovery show even if they were? And so I think that we really need to collectively understand the seriousness of this on every level. That these algorithms that are shaping the information that we see in the world every day, that are going to start generating most of the information on the internet that then gets scraped to train them and make them better, that are deciding whether or not a child should stay with their parent, that are deciding whether or not a small business should be able to serve the community that they're in, that are deciding whether or not you need to see this doctor. And I could go on and on about the risk assessment algorithms in the medical field. There's tons more that are just as biased. Even though black women are 56% more likely than white women to die of breast cancer, when you go in, they have a breast cancer risk assessment algorithm where if you put your race as white, it gives you 2 more points and says you're at higher risk. Why? These things are out right now. The robots aren't coming, they're already here. And so the question is, are we going to be victims of them, or are we going to be shapers of how they're used? And in order to do that, we have to be intentional. And it's annoying. We have to read news we wouldn't read. We have to have some context about how these things work to know what we should ask for in them, to know what we should ask for them to be doing, that in our individual fields, like it's a big law firm that just basically signed some multi-year contract for an AI lawyer that it wants to work with. Do we want that? Do we want computers that are trained on past data to determine the law moving forward? Right? But are we just going to let it happen, or are we going to do something about it to shape it? And I think that is our responsibility in this moment in time. We're at a time where the technology is emerging. It's a blessing and a curse. And whether it's a superhero or a supervillain in the future is entirely up to us and what we do and don't do moving forward. Yeah. All right, y'all.